Welcome to Sounding Board, a production of Soroptimist International of Novato, whose mission it is to improve the lives of women and girls through projects leading to social and economic empowerment. I'm Freda Kaplan, and my guest today is Linda Witong, who is a research consultant to Soroptimist International on subjects relating to the United Nations. Today we're going to be talking about child marriage.
Yes, we will. Some of the causes of child marriage include, the first would be poverty and economic survival strategies. For example, let's back up. Girls are second-class citizens. Very often, different cultures, different countries, different parental groups will view them as a burden, an economic burden. They take more food. Why should they pay for the food? Why should they give them the same education or the opportunities that they give their boys? Because, of course, boys can advance and economically empower the family to a better extent. One way when a family is economically struggling is to have what's known as dowry, which is, I have a daughter and I want to marry her off. The problem is that they see a girl as a financial commodity, and the family knows that they have to pay a dowry if they want to marry their daughter off under that scenario. The problem is that the older the daughter is, the more of a dowry they have to pay. So the incentive for the family is to sell their daughter when she's younger and have to pay less dowry. The other financial term that comes into mind here is called bride price. And in that case, the families will get a price for their child. But again, the younger the bride, the higher price they're going to fetch. The price will again decrease as the girl gets older. And the family then has an economic incentive to get their daughter married as young as possible and as fast as possible. It also relieves an economic burden to the family. They can lift their economic burden. They don't have a girl to support anymore. They don't have to worry about educating her. They don't have to worry about feeding her. And in some instances, they're hoping that she'll get a better life financially with her husband's family, who will then take over the financial responsibility for the girl. Orphan girls are especially vulnerable to this because there's no one to protect them, and they're almost always seen as a burden to whoever their caretakers are. They're also encouraging daughters to marry early to catch husbands before they migrate to better jobs out of the area or out of the country. And finally, there's the concept of wife inheritance, which is where you marry a woman or a girl to inherit their property that will pass through them. And of course, the girl very often doesn't have any rights to the property when she's married. Her new husband will. Another reason for child brides is gender inequality, which is basically girls are seen as second-class citizens. They have no other use other than to be bought and sold as a commodity. Another reason that child marriage takes place is the sealing of land and property deals. For example, in Central Africa, very often they'll seal a property purchase or a deal over land by marriage of a child bride. That's sort of sealing the deal, so to speak. Child marriage is also a way of settling disputes. Very often some families end up owing a huge debt to a landowner or to some other entity. And so as a way of paying their debt, they marry off their girl, and the younger the better, to pay off their debt or to settle a dispute, and sometimes it's a tribal dispute. Control over sexuality and protecting family honor is a huge theme that you're going to see again and again. And basically, for example, in Bangladesh, girls are married soon after puberty. And again, it's because the families are so afraid they're going to have more interaction with boys now, and there's more of a chance of having sex outside of marriage. And to have sex outside of marriage in Bangladesh and many other cultures is to bring dishonor and shame to the family and the community. And so they hurry to marry a girl when she reaches puberty so that they won't be shamed, their community won't be shamed, and also to avoid a girl being kidnapped or sexually assaulted. In many communities, the girl is the one that goes out to get the water. They're there to go out to get the firewood, and they run the risk of being kidnapped or sexually assaulted in doing that. rather than thinking of the girl as being a victim of a crime, which is what we would think here, they're saying, you've brought shame to us, you've brought shame to our family, you've brought shame to our community. So if they're married, that's one way of at least avoiding the shame to their family. Another one is tradition and culture. There's a video that was circulating in the region of India where it had little toddlers going around crying, and even very small children, and even like 7, 8, 9, 10, and toddlers at the age of 2 or 3, and they're all crying. And why are they crying? Because their boys and girls are all getting married. And why are they getting married at that young of an age? Because tradition has it as a way of passing on property and wealth within families. Wow. That's in India, yeah. Nigeria, again, the girls are being married under the age of 15 because it's, among other things, poverty is a huge factor, but also to increase ties within families and communities. Another reason that you see child marriage surface is insecurity in times of war and natural disasters. For example, girls are in little refugee camps, and again, they're going out to get the firewood or the water. They run a very real risk of being killed, kidnapped, or sexually assaulted. Also, the families see, maybe in times of civil war, they see the boys as going away to be soldiers, and so they want their girls to get married as early as possible to have some sort of economic security, and also, again, to protect them from the shame that would happen if they lose their virginity before they're married. Also, in terms of natural disasters, we have Nepal as an excellent example. Anytime you have a natural disaster in a country like Nepal that was economically on the verge anyway, not doing very well, you have a situation where families will be desperate to either sell their daughters at an early age to raise some money to support the rest of their family, or in the hope that somehow they can give the girl a better life. Those are two motives that will happen in a natural disaster. Then the final one is marriage as a means of consolidating powerful relations between families. For example, there is a country that will have forced marriage to a cousin, forced marriage to a rich man, or forced marriage to an influential man, all in the name of trying to enhance their power or their influence in their society or between families.
In what countries is it most prevalent now, child marriage?
Okay, the highest is in sub-Saharan Africa, where 4 in 10 girls marry before the age of 18, and 1 in 8 are married or in union before the age of 15. This is followed by Latin America, the Caribbean, the Middle East, and North Africa. I took the liberty of breaking it down. The highest rates of child marriage before 18 are in Nigeria, which is 76%. Central African Republic, 68%, Chad, 68%, and Bangladesh at 65%. There's a host of other countries that are in the 50, 55%, but I wanted to take the top number. Married adolescents by the age of 15, unfortunately, is also extremely prevalent, and I broke that down to some countries. For example, Chad, again, 29% of their population are married by 15. Nigeria, 28% of their population. Guinea, 21%. India, 18%. And Bangladesh, 18% of their children are married by the time they're 15 years old. Child marriage is declining now, but the progress has been uneven. And as I would say, show me a country that is in civil war, an armed conflict, has had a natural disaster, or has an incredible rate of poverty, and I'll show you child marriage is still being an issue that they're grappling or struggling with at this point in time.
How about China? Is there...
Yes. China doesn't really have a lot of statistics available about child marriage, but one thing that's been noticed is that the child marriage rate is increasing. So you're sort of wondering, well, why would that be? There's always been child marriages in the rural areas of China, but it's increasing. And the irony is that there's a one-child policy which has been in place in China, which has resulted in a traditional preference for sons. The problem is it's created a gender imbalance in China with 33.6 million more men than women now in China. So where are all the men going to get brides? Parents now want to have their children marry at a very early age before, for example, the son may leave the rural area, for example, to go to a factory town, or before he may leave to go abroad, or just on general principle because they don't want their son to be a bachelor. That's called a bare branch. So the parents, I know it's interesting, the parents are doing everything in their power to get their sons married at an early age. But what happens if you don't have enough girls? Sadly, one of the trends right now is an increase in the trafficking of Vietnamese girls who are either duped by thinking they're going to go for a better life, or they're drugged and brought across the border. $3,000 will get you a Vietnamese child bride. Again, what to do if you have all of these men who need brides? So one thing, unfortunately, it's led to is an increase in the trafficking of Vietnamese girls as either child brides or brides in general. And they're either duped into thinking they're going to have a better life in China, or in many cases they're being drugged and taken across the border. For $3,000, a trafficker, that's the price a trafficker will get for a Vietnamese bride. It's cheaper in many ways than marrying a girl from China, because a girl from China, their families now can demand an elaborate banquet as well as the purchase of a house. So a lot of families, especially if they don't have the economic wherewithal, will try and opt for getting a bride, either a child bride or a bride from Vietnam.
And I understand some are kidnapped.
Yes.
Even university girls are
yes.
kidnapped.
Or they're drugged. You know, they go to a nightclub or they go to a party, they're drugged, and the next thing they know, they're in China being auctioned off to the highest bidder.
Well, how about Indonesia?
Indonesia is among the top 10 for child brides, and the minimum, there's really no minimum age for marrying girls in terms of the local religion. The minimum age, legal age, is 16 with parental consent. Even girls from wealthy families are married in Indonesia, and again, it's because they place an incredibly high value on the chastity of their girls. So once the girls are reaching puberty in Indonesia, the families are scared to death that they're going to have more to do with boys, and there may be, you know, sex outside of marriage. This brings shame and dishonor not only to the families but to their communities. So the rush is on to get the girls married as early as they can once they reach puberty because of that fear. A second reason, again, is poverty. That lightens the financial burden on the families that are supporting the girls, and their hope is that the girl may get a better life by marrying into the husband's family or marrying the husband. It's also considered extremely inappropriate to reject a marriage proposal because the girl may end up being a spinster.
Oh.
Yes, I mean, that's like, that's not good. Brazil is another location that's home to the highest absolute number of child brides in Latin America. And there's several factors that contribute to the child marriage in Brazil. The high levels of early pregnancy, again. The families will, to avoid shame and dishonor, but also to get the girl to have a better life, perhaps economically, and to get child support for the child. The father should, you know, assume the financial responsibility for the girl and for the child as well. It's also thought of as a way to protect girls. Unfortunately, there's a number of girls that seek refuge by marrying older men to get away from abuse in their own family, very often by relatives or stepfathers. That's been one factor. Another factor is because they're like many girls around the world, their opportunities are limited. They very often are not educated or not educated sufficiently to get a job. They may not understand in that area, plus the areas around the world, a lot of the language or the requirements of a job or employment because they haven't had the education or the training. This may be the only opportunity for them to get any type of economic survival on their part or for the part of their family. Also, men desire to marry younger girls because they consider them more attractive and easier to control. Eastern Europe, believe it or not, there's child marriage there. And in many entities, it's an important aspect of their cultural identity. Girls there in many areas are told that from early childhood that Your destiny is to be a mother. Your destiny is to be a cook. Your destiny is to be a very good house cleaner and to support your family at home. That is your destiny. Don't even think about getting an education. It's going to be your main accomplishment in life. Also, the men there, when they're marrying, they want to marry a younger girl because they're going to be obedient. They're going to be, again, easy to control. There's also the Romas have hostility and discrimination that they face being their group. And so to them, it's a very important part of their tradition to have child marriage and to have female virginity as an important cornerstone of their way of life. So they're going to uphold that tradition by marrying their girls off as soon as possible to maintain tradition and also maintain their virginity. They're also socially marginalized. So the idea of a girl being able to go out and get any type of job or any type of employment is like practically non-existent. Then there are wealthy families in certain areas who want to marry off their daughters at an early age to get a good match. No riffraff, no riffraff. And so they'll marry them off at an early age for that purpose. Again, the theme with many of these cultures is loss of virginity, loss of honor to the family, shame to the community, shame to the family. So that, again, is a motive with all of these groups as well. Again, they are seen as marrying a young man before they go abroad so they can have a good life. Their family can perhaps have a good way of economic support. They're married off during Civil War or high rates of migration because they want to get the boys or men before they leave the area. And their feeling is that, well, perhaps we can protect our girls if they're married and they're with their husband or with their husband's families. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen that much, that's not necessarily a result, but that's what they believe. They also, in many of the mountainous communities, they're so isolated that the girls may not even know how to speak or write the language of the rest of the country, so they have no other options. Sometimes young couples choose to marry because they have a safe place with each other, and their life, perhaps with the girl, is better than what she's facing at home, which is sad. And, for example, domestic violence. Africa, I believe Africa was one of the countries or continents that you were talking about.
Yes.
By 2050, Africa will have the largest number and global share of child brides in the world. One reason for that is due to poverty. Again, tradition, you don't want to stray from tradition in those countries. There's a low value placed on girls. They're looked at as a commodity, but you're also so impoverished. There's such malnutrition and such poverty in many of these areas, they have to do whatever they can to survive. So, for example, in Nigeria, they have a chronic malnutrition issue there. They're going to marry their daughters as early as possible. The financial burden will be lifted. Perhaps they'll even get money by marrying her or some other form of collateral. For example, there was an example of a girl that was bought at age 12 with a dowry of 10,000 Nigerian naira, which would be tantamount to $54 in American currency. So for $54, you could get yourself a child bride. The Central African Republic, again, 68% are married before they reach the age of 18, 29% are married before they reach the age of 15. It has one of the second lowest GDPs in the world and the second highest rate of child marriage. Again, poverty goes hand in hand there. The younger the wife, the higher the status for the one who's buying it. The family is going to try again to ease their economic burden. Also a way to ensure that the child isn't going to be sexually harassed, killed, or kidnapped on their way to get firewood or water. It's a way of maintaining social ties among families and communities and sealing deals over land and property. Chad is another one where you have 29% of the children are married before the age of 15. That happens in wealthy and less wealthy households. In cultural tradition is one of the ones with wealthy families with not so wealthy families. What do you do with a large number of children, especially if they're girls? Was an example where a 22-year-old man asked father for the hand of his daughter who was 12, and he couldn't say no in his mind because it was tradition to accept it. So for the princely sum of 12 cows, he was prepared to sell his daughter for child marriage. Well, the man had other ideas. He decided to kidnap the girl and said, I'll only give you 2 cows. Fortunately, at that point, a rescue group intervened, and the man who was going to marry the girl got no cows, and the girl was able to stay in her family and get educated. I think you also asked me about the United States.
Yes.
Marriage.
Is it legal?
Well, okay. The legal age without parental consent is 18. However, with parental consent, it can be younger than 18. With a judicial consent, it can be younger than 18. And actually, many children can, in some states, there's not even a minimum age if it's okayed by a judge. For example, well, let me back up. In 36 states, minors can marry with judicial consent. In 34 states, 16 or 17-year-olds can marry with the parents' permission. Massachusetts and New Hampshire allow 12 or 13-year-old girls to marry with parental and judicial permission. Florida and Massachusetts allow girls as young as 12 to be wed with the consent of a judge. New Jersey and New York, 16 or 17-year-olds can marry with parental consent, and children under 15 can marry with judicial approval. The trend with all of these states is if a child gets pregnant, the judge will look at all the factors and determine, you know, is this a good match for the child to have at least some support for her child as well as for herself if she's pregnant. Until, for example, July of 2016, there was no minimum age requirement in Virginia. You could get married at like 12, let's say.
Or less.
Or less. Well, that's highly unusual. But for example, 13 years old were getting married because they were pregnant. And Senator Jill Vogel, a state senator, deserves a lot of credit because she pushed a bill that said, no, you can't get married younger than 18. And she did that because she learned that a man in his 50s was dating a high school student. And they looked and they said, we're going to do away with this pregnancy exception, which is what had enabled people to marry at a much younger age. Because as far as we're concerned, that's getting a man or an 18-year-old or above outside of being criminally culpable for child, statutory rape, and they're not being accountable. They can get married, and that way they're not going to be accountable, and that wasn't right. And
it's punishing the girl.
Yeah, it's punishing the girl and letting the man go scot-free. So thank you, State Senator Jill Vogel. Any rate, child marriages are most common in West Virginia and Texas. Other states that have an above average rates of child marriage are Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, Nevada, and California.
California.
Let's talk about California. The minimum age of California without parental consent is 18. However, California is one of the states where there really isn't a minimum age if there's a parental consent or judicial approval. And again, they're looking to what happens if a little girl gets pregnant. So this is to allow pregnant minors to get married if the judge deems that to be proper. Now, the judge is going to require all sorts of hoops to go, or all sorts of factors to be met before they're going to allow something like that to happen. It's going to include premarital counseling, social, economic, and personal responsibility, education, and the parental intervention or input before they're ever going to, consent to something like that. But yes, California would be one of them. Florida and New Mexico also do not have a minimum age for the girls if a female is pregnant.
Qualifying.
Yes, yes.
That's horrifying.
Do you have any follow-up questions?
No, I just like to observe that we're not outside this happening. Child marriage is still in California and the United States.
It is, but it is with a judicial intervention and oversight in many of the countries throughout the world. It's looked at as a form of relieving an economic burden or as a form of getting income. In certain places in the world, they will have girls as children and then just start preparing to get them married as early as they can. Why? To get an income for the family and to make themselves richer and richer. So it's looked at as a financial business in many areas.
A commodity.
Girls are considered a commodity. They're kindly, I mean, the best description is they're second-class citizens, and in some places in the world, they're just like a piece of chattel to be bought and sold.
Like the cows.
Yes, unfortunately, yes.
Wow. Well, thank you, Linda, for
You're welcome.
informing us on this.
You're welcome.
It's quite shocking, and
Yeah.
especially to know that it's prevalent here in the United States.
Yes.
Thank
Yes,
you.
it was prevalent, not like the rest of the world, not by a long shot. In terms of statistics, United States isn't even a blip. But there is marriage under the age of 18 under certain circumstances in the United States, yes.
Well, thank you for talking to us today.
You're welcome.
And I'd like to thank the crew from Soroptimist International of Novato. I'd like to thank the Buck Institute for Research on Aging for allowing us to use their lovely studio. I'd like to thank Leon Johnson, our studio engineer. And I'd like to thank all of you for watching. Thank you.